Oppenheimer is now available to check out in theaters. It's been promoted for over a year and has all this buzz going into the film. But is it really worth all this hype and should you be checking out in theaters? Well, stick around and let's discuss it. Oppenheimer is the story of American scientist J. Robert Oppenheimer and his role in the development of the atomic bomb. The film stars Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, Robert Downey Jr., Jason Clarke, and many others, and was directed by Christopher Nolan, and you know him for doing films like Inception, Interstellar, and the Dark Knight trilogy. So going into Oppenheimer, I wouldn't say that I had the most excitement for this film. A lot of people, they were really hyped for this film. I saw the trailer and I was like, all right, I'll go ahead and check it out. Christopher Nolan, I like some of his films. Some of his films I haven't seen, and there's other films I don't really care for. Tenet being the last one that I watched, and I really didn't care for that film at all. So I was very cautious going into this film. One thing I can really say is this is being advertised as this mainstream big blockbuster of the summer, and I think for some it will work for certain groups of people, and then I think for other people they're just not going to really like this. First off, this film is 3 hours and it has 3 different stories going on. You have Oppenheimer's personal life and him building the bomb and the Manhattan Project. You have the senators meeting, you have Robert Downey Jr. and his interaction with Oppenheimer, and then you have another meeting with the government, and this is basically discussing Oppenheimer's security clearance. So you have all 3 of these stories going on. The aesthetics of the movie is really good. You have a mixture of color, and you also have a mixture of black and white in certain scenes, mainly towards the scenes towards Robert Downey Jr.'s part of the story. I will say, even though it is following the life of Oppenheimer, it often does jump in between a lot of different stories. Actual timeline, it's a little bit confusing and you can get a little bit lost. It talks about quantum physics a lot, and I think for some, it's going to be kind of boring because you don't really know a lot about the quantum physics, and they don't really do a good job of actually explaining some of that. So I can say that some of those parts were kind of boring, and I can definitely see where other people would get really bored with that. And if you have a big interest in that, of course, this film, it's going to really interest you. My biggest problem with this film is the fact, even though it's 3 hours, it does feel really long and it does drag for me a bit. It's not an action film. And really, as far as like the atomic bomb and how that is actually produced, and how you know in the trailer that atomic bomb is eventually going to go off in the film, that actually doesn't happen until about 2 hours in the film. So if you're going into this film and you're expecting action, I'm telling you, this is not that kind of film. It's very heavy on the dialogue, and even for me, I thought this film was kind of tough to get through at times. I definitely felt the runtime, I would say like 2 hours and 15, 2 hours and 30 minutes. And I did feel like the jumping in between different timelines, it did make it kind of a chore to watch at times. But I think the acting overall is very good. There's a ton of characters here. Could be a lot of characters that I could sit here and list, and people that you can actually recognize in this film. And I do have to say, even though there is a lot of characters and a lot of good actors in this film, I do feel like there's too many people littered in the film, and I feel like it's very easy to lose sight of who's in the film and what they're doing, and then switching in the timelines. It definitely could get very confusing for a mainstream audience. So I could definitely see where this film, it could feel a little bit too much at times, and I definitely feel that this is a film where when I watched the film, I never felt like it was a film that I was like, oh man, I can't wait to watch this film again when the film actually ended. I felt like it was one of those films that it has a lot of history behind it, and I definitely was really excited to learn about that history. But it does have a lot of things that can feel kind of boring, and stuff where it doesn't really explain every little thing all the time, and some things that you may not pick up on right away. And I think it's one of those films where you definitely would have to revisit it again. But again, this isn't like a casual watch. You can't sit down at your house and just watch this film casually. It's a very much pay attention the whole time. You may miss something, and if you have to pause the movie or something like that, you probably would have to at home. At a theater, it's very fast-paced, it's quick, and you don't really have a lot of time to actually process everything that is really thrown at you. There are some really cool shots here, especially when they're out in the desert. That looked really cool, the shots that they use, and the shot composition, of course, that looked really good as well. But I do feel like people have said, okay, so he used no CGI in this film, which is impressive. But if you really think about it, majority of this film is people around a table pretty much debating certain things about Oppenheimer, and there's a lot of talking scenes, so you don't really have to use CGI because this is not one of those action-packed films. But I do applaud him for using actual practical effects here. But I just feel like it's being a little bit overhyped at the fact that he didn't use CGI for this film, because again, it's pretty much 90% talking, and it's just not one of those films that has a lot of action that would even need to use CGI anyway. The whole sound of this, I definitely feel like it would be made for IMAX, especially during louder parts of the film and just certain intense conversations that are in the film. However, I do feel like there are parts in the film where the stakes should feel a little bit higher, and they're not as high as they should be. And I feel like it does go on a little bit longer than it should, and I definitely feel like the runtime should be cut around about 2.5 hours, because it does feel like it should end a little bit sooner. And there is a lot of information to really process here, and I definitely appreciate the history aesthetic here. And Oppenheimer, I do feel at times he's kind of an asshole, especially in his personal life and how he treats Florence Pugh in here. I really felt like he definitely came off as an asshole, so it was a little bit hard to root for his character at times. Although I did feel a little bit of sympathy for him when he's going through all these different struggles after building the atomic bomb. That was very interesting to see how that was handled. But at the same time, I didn't feel very surprised of how the government treated him and how he was treated as this just piece of crap human being that really didn't mean anything at that point. Performance-wise, I did mention earlier that Florence Pugh is in this film. I thought she did a really good job for what she actually was handed. Now, there is a part where she's having some mental illness in which they don't really revisit later in the film. They kind of have this small part really involved with her and Oppenheimer, and it just kind of gets shoved to the side. I felt like Cillian Murphy playing Oppenheimer, he did a really good job. And another performer that I really did like in this film is Matt Damon. I thought he put on a stellar performance. He knew what he was supposed to do in this role, and I feel like anything with Matt Damon, when he's in it, he really knows what to do in each role that he actually plays, and he makes it his own, and he is no exception to the role in this film as well. I also like that they actually incorporated Albert Einstein in this. That was really cool as well. He has a few scenes where he doesn't really say anything, but it's just really cool that he's really a part of history. I would have liked them to really go a little bit more outside of the fact of the atomic bomb and Oppenheimer's life a little bit, and really show the effect of what actually happened to the atomic bomb later, but they don't actually do that. And the film, it ends, I wouldn't say abruptly, but I feel like there could have been a little bit more to actually that atomic bomb and actually stretching the runtime a little bit more in that aspect. And I did say that this film is already long, but I do wish that some of the portions with Oppenheimer was condensed a little bit and some of the other things stretched out. So I'm kind of in the middle of the runtime, because on one end, on what we're actually given, I wish that it's actually cut shorter, but I would be okay with it being a little bit longer if they actually kind of showed the after effects of the atomic bomb and what actually came about. But unfortunately, they don't do that. So as far as a score for this film, I would give it a 3 out of 5. I do have to say that if you're going to check out this film, just know it's not an action film and it has a lot of heavy dialogue. So if you're not a fan of that, then I would say skip this film. The whole process of how a film should be made, I think all of that is there. I just think that the script needed a little bit more rework, and the way that they structured the film could have been a little bit better. And overall, it's a very important history type of lesson to actually get out of this film, but I just don't think this is a film that I could say that I need to add into the collection or really rewatch anytime soon. However, I do think that it would be a rewatch in the future just to check it out again and see if I can pick up on other things. But let me know in the comments, what did you think about Oppenheimer? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you just think it was kind of meh? A lot of the reviews I've seen, people have really loved it. So let me know in the comments if you really loved it or if you agree with my review. Thank you guys for checking out my review, and I will see you guys on my next review.